It's fairly clear to me that a hike of anywhere near that magnitude for fruit machines would pretty much close every bingo hole and arcade in the country.
It was just awful what he did. Came out and said, Charlie Kirk's been shot, like, let's effing go, and cheering and laughing.
If they ban vaping indoors, I will go full Joker, I think. I really will have had enough at that point.
Hello and welcome back to Last Orders. I'm Tom Slater, editor of Spiked, joined as I am in every single episode by Chris Snowdon from the IEA. How you doing, Chris?
Not bad, nice to be out of the house.
And we are delighted to be joined by James Price, former government advisor. How are you doing, James?
I'm really well, thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk about a lot today. We're going to talk about whether the British public are a bit more libertarian than maybe the politicians think. We're going to dig into the war on gambling, which is heating up in the run-up to the budget. And we also want to check in, James, with the goings-on at the Oxford Union, because I know that you've been a leading force in that. Before we do, I just want to let everyone know that our documentary, Think Before You Post, all about the rise of the British speech police, we've released that. It came out on Monday. If you haven't checked it out yet, do go give it a watch. Even though it's currently being suppressed on X, because apparently it's age inappropriate. So thank you to the Online Safety Act. So go and find Think Before You Post on YouTube, on X if you've logged in, and let us know what you think. So James, let's start with you. You wrote a piece for us this week, a very good piece about the fact that the British public are often thought of being, sometimes quite in favour of a lot of the nanny state policies or a lot of the anti-freedom policies that we rail against. But the Adam Smith Institute have produced some polling which would suggest the opposite. Do you want to tell us a bit about this?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. It's my, I think, debut piece for Spiked, hopefully the first of many. I was thinking about the 100 years since the Blessed Margaret was born, a woman who did almost no wrong except that she didn't like beards, unfortunately. No one can be perfect. And despite her not being a very fun character in lots of ways, I think her only vice was probably not getting enough sleep, that she ushered in this kind of great new age of freedom in all sorts of ways, probably more so than she even intended. It's been, I think, received wisdom, certainly in the kind of the blob bureaucracy that I've spent years fighting against and even longer hating, that it's now inevitable that you have freedoms being taken away because the world is much more dangerous than you think. The internet is much more dangerous than you could possibly have imagined, and that therefore it's you need to take freedoms away from people. And the public has seemingly, we think, gone along with that. You've got someone like Sebastian Payne, who's a dear friend of mine, but I think represents a very mainstream of orthodox kind of Tory thinking in the Times newspaper these days, saying someone like Nigel Farage, who's obviously a libertarian, straight out of school into the City of London in its Thatcherite heyday. I wouldn't dare try and imagine what kind of fun he was able to get up to there that you couldn't do now. Would have to temper his libertarian instincts, both in the personal realm and in the economic libertarian sphere as well, in order to win over Middle England. And that's what Seb has said. That's what a lot of people, I think, assume. And this polling, I think, proves that wrong, which is wonderful, and that people will want a lot more of a fun life, certainly when we're done with Rachel Reeves.
And are there any kind of like headline statistics or particular measures which surprised you or stuck out from all of those?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hopefully do a useful thing and tell people to go and have a look at both the post and the polling afterwards. But it's astonishing that even Labour voters of the last election, in their droves, want the government to leave people alone. When it comes to the way they choose to live their lives, you're looking at like 90% of people saying, no, the government shouldn't tell me how to spend my money, which is ironic given how many people, I suppose, get benefits in one way or another. That a cognitive dissonance there. But then when it comes to, even in people's personal lives, how they can comport themselves, you're talking big, massive 2/3 style majorities, even amongst Labour voters, for being left alone, which goes wildly against, as I say, what the received wisdom of the BBC and the commentary I would have you believe.
Absolutely. I did love, this wasn't in the Adam Smith polling, but More in Common had some numbers out recently about digital ID, because that was a classic example of politicians who always say, you libertarians, you're crazy, you rail against these things, but the public actually support it. Before Keir Starmer announced it, it was like north of 50% support for a digital ID. Now it's down in the low 30s. So it's exactly the Starmer effect, the reverse Midas touch, everything he touches turns to shit. So therefore, we should hope that he takes up many of these causes, Chris, I suppose.
Yeah, well, he is doing, unfortunately. I did some quite similar polling with the IEA a good 10 years ago, I think. And we sort of found the same thing, which certainly in the abstract, people do sound quite libertarian. They want to be left alone personally. But then when you give them specific policies, very often they'll support them. So our questions were things like, a bit like yours, do you think the government should interfere in your life. Now, of course, it's well known that the way you phrase a question in a poll has a big effect on what answer you get. But broadly speaking, given that it was with comrades, so they don't just let you ask anything. Obviously, you've got to abide by the pollster's code or whatever. But basically, people were saying, I think the government is going too far in these areas. People should have the right to eat, drink, smoke, and whatever. But then if you said, are you in favour of fairly extreme measures, like, graphic warnings on food, most people, not a massive majority, but as I recall, more than 50% would say yes. My two takeaways from doing that, which I think I feel the same way about your polling, James, is that what people say in the abstract is often contradicted by what they say when given specific ideas. And it's basically the I'm a libertarian but syndrome, that people like to think of themselves as being pretty liberal, but they've got pet peeves about various different things. And the other is that if you give people an added option, so it's not just like the hardcore nanny state option versus libertarian, there's something else, they will often go for that. So we did polling on the smoking ban, in which we said, do you think smoking should be banned in all pubs? This is years after the ban had come in. Should smoking be banned in all pubs? Should it be legal everywhere, basically? Or would you support smoking rooms, ventilated smoking rooms? And when you ask people that, the majority either said it should be allowed everywhere or should at least have smoking rooms. And that's why Action on Smoking Health never give people that option. Very often, actually, the British public will go to a more moderate option if they're given one. I'll give you another example of that, because Forrest did some polling this week, I think. Yeah, Monday. On this tobacco vapes bill, the generational tobacco ban in particular. And they found that if you just say to people, right, you're allowed to drink and gamble and do all these other things when you're 18, should you also be allowed to buy tobacco? 70% or something of people said yes. So that clearly they should oppose the generational tobacco ban, right? Then they changed the question and said, this is what the government's proposing, that the age at which you can buy cigarettes increases every year. Do you support this? Are you against it? Or do you think that the minimum age should be raised to 21? At that point, the number of people who think 18 should be the age dropped to like minority territory. And a significant number of people said they would be happy with it being, well, they would prefer it to be 21. And then you got another third or so of people who just support the government's policy. So in both cases, they probably don't support the government's policy. But if you give them this other option, suddenly they're not so bothered about it being 18 anymore. So the take home is that people are not thinking about these things very much, obviously, right? These are people just sat at home, very often being paid a pittance to do these stupid surveys they want to get through as quickly as they can. They're not going to think deeply about every single question. And that's why we shouldn't maybe take polling all that seriously.
No, I think that's fair enough. But you mentioned about the ID card point, and there was a lot of polling. Again, I'll take the point exactly that this is sort of surface, face value, whatever, not very strong valence amongst people. But it was broadly popular, which is why, at least in part, Starmer went to do it, because he thought, here's a popular policy I can do. And as you say, it makes contact with reality, or maybe with Starmer himself, it suddenly becomes unpopular. But to be fair to someone like Nigel Farage, who immediately came out and said, this is terrible, I think it's really awful, I'm going to go against this. Whilst Kemi Badenoch, I can't believe I'm saying, daring to question the dear leader, said, well, there are arguments on both sides and we can have a debate, but it's just blah, 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 blah. And it was Farage who was pretty clear on this and said, nope, it's bad. I'm going to change the polling. Because so many people, I think, with politicians, you're right, Chris, they fall into hot with this. We've got to follow where the people are at. The polling is meant to be a tool to see where people are at and what you can do to change their minds, or the things to say. Like, but hang on a minute, wouldn't it be really draconian for a 42-year-old to have to make his 43-year-old mate buy him a pack of fags? You ask that question, the polling changes. Oh, okay, this can inform making the arguments that we believe to be right. And I think too many politicians just look at polls and go, okay, well, that's what I've got to do then. And that's a massive, massive weakness.
Exactly. And it's one thing to respond to public opinion when it's an issue of overwhelming importance and it's the defining issue. Like if you were not responding to the fact that the public are very concerned about migration, obviously that could do it for you. But at the same time, this is part of the reason that we often lament, Chris, lack of a pushback on a lot of nanny state stuff, is that people have got bigger fish to fry, to be perfectly frank. They might be irritated by many of the things that they encounter. They might not even be aware about how much of their packet of cigarettes is tax and so on and so forth. But things would have to get very bad to the point where people were taken to the streets or something, you know, on these sorts of measures.
They're not taken to the streets in Australia, where tobacconists are going up in flames on an almost daily basis, and then they've effectively opened up a new front in the war on drugs for no reason, and yet people are still going I don't think we should reduce the tax on cigarettes or legalise vaping. That would be ridiculous. That would be an extreme response, and another one's gone up. So no, you're right. I mean, but on the other hand, I mean, the flip side to that is that support for these kind of things, if it's wide at all, is very shallow. People just don't care that much either way. I don't think, except for the people who are directly affected, which tend to be, not always, but tend to be a minority. Smokers, most obviously, but also gamblers will be coming on to later on.
But on the other side as well, the zealots, right? Because the zealots who really want to ban it, it's the only thing they care about, and they'll never stop. And so if you've got a majority of people who are like, you know what, I can't be bothered with this. If you're in government and you're only a couple of ministers and advisors or whatever, and you've got these people hammering you all the time with that zeal of someone who really just wants to ban this stuff, you think, oh, okay, fine. I'm busy trying to stop World War III or whatever else it may be. I'm not going to have these people sending the petitions all the time.
But it's a mistake, if I say so. It's a big mistake. If any politicians watching,
many do, I'm told.
I know a lot of government ministers tune in. It's the best thing you can do is just stonewall them and say, no, we're not going to do this, because otherwise they'll just keep coming back again and again and again. Within like 5 minutes, they will come back with more extreme demands, as if you haven't solved anything at all, as if in fact the problem has somehow got worse. So you just got to say, I'm not interested in this rubbish. We're not going to do any of it. So you're wasting your time, which is more or less what the government did back in the day with minimum pricing. They said, we're not doing it. We don't think it'll work. And these people, the campaigners just shut up for 10 years until Starmer came in. Now they feel that maybe they sense blood again, so they have another go. But they just gave up because they realised they were knocking at a closed door.
And I think we know where Labour stands on these issues. We know where Reform stands on these issues. I dare say.
Do we? I don't know if we do. Well, I mean, I'd like to hear a lot more from
maybe
Reform.
Not kind of front to back, but you can tell that certainly they're not going to add to the thicket of policies in this area. And if anything, you can imagine them wanting to do a few things around this. But James, as someone who's worked in Conservative administrations as a Conservative yourself, where do you think the party is on these issues? Because that's a recurring theme of this podcast over the years was Tory politicians maybe coming in sounding quite good on the nanny state, particularly leaders, and then going native with the public health lot very quickly. So where is these sorts of issues at in the Conservative Party?
And getting sand again once they leave, right? Which is a really
when
infuriating
it really doesn't
thing,
matter, they're
right?
really upset.
I wish I'd done this. And I could say it's not just when it comes to gambling or smoking or drinking or any of this stuff. Anything where it comes to personal liberty, it's such an alien idea in the blob, in the civil service, whatever you want to call it, the deep state, all that sort of stuff. That I remember being in a meeting ahead of the Omicron wave of COVID coming through. I was in the Department for Education, and there were calls from the teaching unions and from the civil servants to say, right, we're going to put masks on kids, primary school age kids, all day, even when they're sat down at their desk working. It's a zero cost intervention. Right? Zero cost to make a small children doing this, which is obviously completely ludicrous. And if we hadn't have done it in a very brief period of time, the trade unions would have gone on strike and yada, yada. But that was the mindset there. I was one voice in a meeting being like, but what about their liberty? And they looked at me like I just told them that their dad was a racist or something evil, right? Like they really then what? Like that, we don't have space for that nonsense here. We're doing important work of muzzling children, right? It's genuinely the mindset that these sort of people had. And so when you've got everyone in a room like that, it takes one loony right wing spad to speak up. To have a minister do that is probably going to get leaked against them if they've not got the stones to follow through and to stonewall them, as Chris says. It is difficult. And so whilst that, everyone should be blamed for being so weak and spongy and left-wing as Tories in government, that is the environment that you're in, which, by the way, is why work now needs to be done on reform and the new Tories who are in and stuff, to make sure that they go in strong and there's a plan on this stuff, to just throw all this stuff away, because you've got to do it on day one. But the legacy, to answer your question, the legacy with the Tory party specifically is there are a bunch of people that love liberty in there, and there are a bunch of people who should probably, frankly, be in the Liberal Democrats and would look at this and go, no, it's actually very conservative and very good for freedom that we take people's freedom away. Someone like James Bethell in the House of Lords would say that quite openly. I've disagreed with him openly for a long time about this. Just going, oh, no, we know best. And it is that very kind of patrician mindset. I don't think people do know best if they just happen to be a lord or in government or whatever.
I think he knows best, don't we?
No, exactly.
I think he thinks he knows best.
He's introducing an amendment to the tobacco and vapes bill, which he's calling it Extinction 2040. So this is where we just ban tobacco sales to everybody.
I see. Well, that was always going to be the next step. The idea that they were going to allow.
You could wait for this to go through Parliament before rushing to the next bill.
It's the Krusty the Clown thing, saying the quiet part out loud.
Exactly. Is there anything on the tobacco and vapes bill that you want to raise here, Chris? Because I know that it's back this week. There's discussion. There's amendments and so on and so forth.
Yeah, well, it's just back. It's in the House of Lords. Various amendments have been put in. Most of them pretty awful.
Doesn't go far enough, presumably, for them.
Yeah, exactly. Let's ban vaping in pubs. Let's ban smoking outside pubs. All this kind of stuff. If they ban vaping indoors, I will go full Joker, I think. I really will have had enough at that point. I'm warning you people, ministers watching.
Exactly.
It's not anymore.
It's not a cost. It's certainly not a cost-free intervention to do that.
No.
Well, in which case, Chris, shall we turn to gambling? There's been a lot of this in the news in the run-up to the budget because it's been widely floated that, if that's even a phrase, that there's going to be taxes for the gambling industry. There's talk of quite significant hikes in various areas. Despite the fact they give a fair amount to the Exchequer already, billions. Do you want to tell us a bit about what seems to be on the cards and what the anti-gambling people are trying to get out of this?
Yeah, there was a Treasury Select Committee hearing this week on gambling taxation. The Treasury Committee, as you might expect, are looking at various taxes. There have been about 1,000 possible taxes, proposed in the media in the last couple of months, and I guess the committee is looking at whether any of them are sensible. Because I mean, there is a big problem now, genuinely, in most areas of taxation, where you will either potentially lose revenue by putting the taxes up, or create such distortionary effects, making people flee the country and things like that, there really isn't any easy money left lying around. So gambling taxes, I guess, are considered to be one of the easier ones because people don't really like online casinos particularly, and they think that these companies make a huge amount of money, and sometimes they do. The question is really, if we hike up these taxes, will these companies go bust? Will they go abroad? Will fewer people use them? Or all three? And ultimately, will they bring in the kind of money that these left-wing think tanks claim that they will? So the proposals, there's been a sort of a swarm effect of left-wing think tanks getting on this train, I think due to funding incentives. But the IPPR, the Social Market Foundation, and Respublica have all popped up in the last year or two saying we need to hike up duties on just general betting duty, bookmakers, sports betting, that kind of thing, remote gambling, online casinos and so on, and machine duty. And they're not talking about a percent or two here or there. They're talking about machine duty, so fruit machines currently pay 20%. IPPR think it should be 50%. Not of profits, of their revenue. Okay, well, that's, on top of that, you will have corporation tax, business rates, normal income taxes, NICs, and so on. But yeah, they think.
And what other taxes get put on in the budget as well?
Yeah, which will also be going up. You go by online gaming tax, same thing, hike it up from 21% to 50%. And sort of general bookmakers taxes go from 15% to 25%. All of those, again, on revenue, not profit. It's fairly clear to me that a hike of anywhere near that magnitude for fruit machines would pretty much close every bingo hall and arcade in the country, because that's what makes the money. Obviously, it makes the money in arcades, but actually, effectively, it makes the money in a lot of bingo halls too, the machines. Online gambling duty, it's difficult to predict exactly what would happen, but I would imagine that the companies that are still based here paying 25% corporation tax will think, we can't afford that anymore. Now you're taking half our revenue, so we'll be off to Gibraltar. And the bottom line is, as even the think tanks in this Treasury Committee hearing admitted, the only way you can deal with that kind of massive tax grab is because you can't make the product more expensive as you could do with alcohol and tobacco. You can just make the consumer experience worse, effectively. You give them poorer odds. So everybody in this debate seems to accept that the primary outcome of very high taxes on any sector of the gambling industry is going to be worse odds. Worse odds mean that punters just feel they're ripped off. They can fairly easily, or very easily, really go online and find a website that is not paying tax in this country who will give you decent odds. So there is an obvious drift to the black market, as it's called, in this area. A black market that has already been growing thanks to affordability checks. Is going to get worse, and of course, the response of the anti-gambling people is, "No, it won't. It'll be fine." Why
didn't we think of that?
This guy from the IPPR, who looked incredibly shifty, because unfortunately he had a habit of sort of sweating and fidgeting and not looking people in the eye.
You had that in your piece, didn't you?
Yeah,
Just a twitchy guy. Really good way of making that. Yep, that guy's legit. Yeah.
He just didn't seem very convincing. But he was going like, no, the betting shops won't close if you put the tax upon them. Well, a third of them have already closed in the last 5-6 years, thanks to anti-gambling regulation.
Was that
the same people
stuff?
said it was going to be fine. I go, oh, it's very sticky. And this is kind of the paradox in the whole thing. Like, they're portraying it on one hand as being a way to tackle problem gambling, and it's also a way to raise supposedly £3.2 billion, which is nearly double the entire gambling tax revenue the country already gets. It's just obviously not going to happen. But they're portraying it as a way of government making money to specifically relieve child poverty. That's the clever angle they've taken. They've got Gordon Brown coming up, go like, we've got to get another £3 billion for the children. I mean, it has to come for some reason from gambling, but it can't do both, right? You can't, assuming that giving people much worse odds via the tax system is going to put people off gambling and therefore reduce problem gambling. Who's going to be paying the tax, right? If people aren't gambling anymore, you can't deal with child poverty, and if you're dealing with child poverty, you're not dealing with problem gambling. You clearly can't do both.
So I think this is to belie what they're actually trying to do. These people when they go to hike a tax somewhere, you're the expert. Pigouvian taxes are designed to disincentivize you from doing something.
Well, no, they're actually technically, strictly speaking, they are there to internalize the externalities.
Right.
So if there's £2 billion worth of harm created, which is what they say about gambling, then you want to tax gambling to the point where you get £2 billion. So it just costs more. So the person is spending what they should be spending if it was for things to be socially optimal, I suppose.
So I think that there's a sort of tweak on this that we could do with sort of controlling totalitarian governments like this, where they'll say at one side of their mouth, we're going to raise money to help the children, and at the other, to different groups, we're going to do this to damage this industry because we think it's evil. And then depending on whether they all close, we'll say, well, that was our plan all along. Or if they do make the money, see, that was our plan all along. And if they do a bit of both, where they raise a bit more money, but they cause some more harm, well, that's fine, because actually what they're not trying to do is stir economic growth or give people a chance to have a nice time to live. They'll or a nice sort of enjoyment of gambling and the excitement of sport, whatever else it may be. They don't actually care about those things. It's a bit of, we want to destroy this thing and we want some more money so we can spaff it on something else.
I just think the campaigners just want to destroy them. I don't think the campaigners care at all.
They definitely do. But then the government that is entertaining it, I think, will take some of that on board as well. And if they do destroy a bit of it, they can say, well, we got a thumbs up from them. And if they do manage to raise some more money, they can waste it elsewhere. And they'll sort of see how it shakes out and say that was our plan all along.
But what they're actually going to get is the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, of course.
In which people go to the black market, the government gets less tax revenue, and if anything, problem gambling gets worse because these unregulated websites don't have any checks on.
What's that line? The experts say this is the one thing we didn't want to happen.
And Chris, in terms of the negative impact of this, because there's been a lot of focus in the media about the number of betting shops that could close, and Betfred have said that they would basically close all of their kind of high street presence if these taxes went up. But surely also just the world of sport in general was so reliant on gambling advertising. There's a reason that when you watch the football on the weekend that you're being bombarded by gambling advertising, is because of the fact that many sports are pretty reliant on it. So how, if the gambling industry in this country does take a hit, surely that's going to have loads of kind of impacts beyond just the gambling industry.
Well, yeah, and they'll also probably just ban gambling advertising and sponsorship at some point in the fairly near future. I'm slightly surprised Labour haven't done it already, actually. But there is a huge amount of money at stake, and it would be crippling for snooker, which of course is the most important sport, and darts as well, to well, slightly less important, but still good sport.
We're a big supporter of all the pub sports.
And people say, again, these bloody campaigners go, no, it'll be fine, because that's what people said about the tobacco sponsorship ban. So yeah, the tobacco sponsorship ban absolutely screwed snooker. They went down to 4 tournaments a year worldwide, didn't have any money at all. Everybody who knows about snooker knows that snooker was nearly killed by the tobacco sponsorship ban, and was only revived because gambling sponsorship was legalized a few years later. And now it's all sponsored by gambling companies. And now I want to say it that way. These people are maniacs, and they must be stopped.
Well, we're speaking about maniacs, people who must be stopped. Should we talk about the, up until recently, president-elect of the Oxford Union? James, this is a story that you've been very much involved in, leading the campaign against George, I forget what his last name is. Abaraonye, who was president-elect. He was going to take office as president of the Oxford Union. Charlie Kirk is assassinated, a man who Abaraonye himself had debated not too long before. He takes to both WhatsApp and to Instagram to essentially sort of luxuriate in the man's death. And as a consequence of this, Oxford Union members rallied against him, seemed to have ousted him as part of the internal processes. You can elaborate as a former president yourself. Last time I checked, he's refusing to accept the result of the election, sort of Donald Trump 2020 style.
Yeah, stop the steal.
Yeah.
It's going to stop the steal.
Do you want to tell us your role in this and also where we're at with this particular story.
Yeah, gladly. I was as a student, I was an unsuccessful student politician. I kind of got halfway up the union's cursus honorum and lost. And then in COVID, in the first lockdown, having just left government, I thought it would be funny to run for a joke to be president, and then I accidentally won, and I became, I think, the oldest president ever or something. And so this was because they put all the voting online, and so all the alumni kind of dug out old membership cards, went, oh, this would be funny, wouldn't it? And then, of course, I had to actually do it alongside a full-time job, and it was absolutely horrendous, and had to deal with student politics after you've just been dealing with adult politics. So I was not keen to have to go back into any of this stuff. I became the secretary of the charity that owns the buildings, and they saw this happen, saw nothing else. So I resigned from this, partly because I'd heard about the visa ban threats that the US Deputy Secretary of State was going to put on people. My wife is American, and I don't dislike my mother-in-law in any way, but especially not enough to want to get a visa ban from not being able to go. So I this resignation as well, because as you say, actually, it was just awful what he did. He came out and said, Charlie Kirk's been shot, like, let's effing go, and cheering and laughing. And then, of course, the shot that the picture of Abaraonye in his tracky bottoms and his Ugg boots, standing across the beautiful Oxford Union buildings, next to Charlie Kirk in his suit looking nice, who wiped the floor with the kid, by the way. And Abaraonye didn't shake his hand afterwards, walked away, yawned kind of dramatically, just rude and in general. But the idea that he had debated against this guy, like looked him in the whites of his eyes, and then was so cheap and crass about it, and then kind of refused to apologize for a while until he maybe realized that he wasn't going to get all the kind of fancy internships that he thought he might get. So a big campaign went to get this guy ousted and all this sort of Byzantine internal rules. But he's now appealing against this 2/3 defeat of him, saying, oh, no, but someone else broke the rules as well and all the rest of it. It's just so deeply unedifying for the whole thing. And this is, I suppose, what happens when you get a bunch of kids who've been told that they're brilliant and wonderful, and then have to actually face the real world and go, it's moving into the sowing from what they've reaped, or the reaping from what they sow territory.
I think the Ugg boot should have been the last straw to them, just on purely aesthetic grounds. But it
Seems like a real scumbag, doesn't he?
And then the Times did a piece just to make it even worse of him having a pop at the current president's girlfriend, and just like, what, this is really, really unedifying. And there have been plenty of other scandals in recent years where there was an Israel-Palestine debate, as there always is, and people said that there were people screaming swear words and threats at them in Arabic, and all these sort of various threats going on. And the problem is, and the reason that people should care, is that those sorts of scandals have always happened in the Oxford Union. There's a great sort of student newspaper front page when Michael Gove was president, and it was like 5 in a bed romp kind of thing, all that sort of stuff, right? It was incidental. It was a bug. I think it's become a feature because people have been getting involved in it, and I suspect, by extension, getting involved in other institutions, classic British institutions, who want to destroy the thing because they think it's colonialist or they think it's evil, and they want to bring it down. And that is a really deep problem. If we don't defend those institutions, you get people who either don't care or, as I say, go, I'm going to decolonize this, it's really terrible, and then we lose it and you can't get these things back.
Would I be right in saying that this gentleman has been the beneficiary of positive discrimination? Because I gather he got an A and 2 Bs in his A-levels.
He did.
I got 2 A's and a B. I never considered applying for Oxford.
Yeah,
and I got A stars now, is right?
You got A stars now as well, so ABB is actually worse than it looks. And he put this on his LinkedIn. He didn't need to do this. Someone just saw this on LinkedIn. It's almost like a boast. And some lefty friends of mine have been quite radicalized by this, where they assumed that sort of positive discrimination would be, you got 2 guys, they've both got 3 A stars. You go for the guy who's had the crap upbringing, or even the guy who's from an ethnic minority or whatever, and that would be fair to balance it out. But the fact that this guy has done so badly, it then shows he can't debate, he can't spell in some of his letters. And he's even, I think he said, some of the phrasing he got right was just completely wrong as well. So it's just embarrassing when he writes these letters and people are having to go through and correct basic spelling mistakes.
But James, isn't this, to play devil's advocate, isn't this a free speech issue and you're engaging in cancel culture?
Yeah, some people have come out and said this, and Toby Young has said this.
Has he?
Yeah, and he and I have debated a bit about this in the past. I think the reason that's not true is that whilst he should not go to prison for saying it's really good that this guy is dead, right? He should be open to the consequences of that in social settings, and that members of any club, the Oxford Union in particular, wherever else, have the right to free assembly. and therefore going through the process of going, you know what, you're not a fit and proper person to run a debating society because you cheered when a guy who liked debating got killed for debating. That is, again, people exercising their right to free assembly.
It's not
and free
the
expression
ideal.
as well.
It's not the ideal job for him. Yeah.
It's not great, is it? No.
Well,
There
that's
are other jobs out there.
But it's not cancel culture when a political party gets rid of their leader, for instance, because they said something absolutely outrageous. It is.
I thought it was when comedians can't get gigs and stuff like that.
I think the attempt to kind of present this as a cancel culture thing, I think obviously there was a well-meaning tendency on our side of the free speech argument to show consistency, which is completely fine, but I think it doesn't necessarily apply in this particular situation. If there was a conversation about some kind of executive at the Oxford Union just forcing him out without going to the members, you could understand there would be more grounds for that. There were some people who were saying he'd be kicked out of the university. I wouldn't support that. He can go and say whatever he wants at his own time. But that doesn't mean that, you know, your members and the people that, you know, work in your organisation can't have a say. Like, it wouldn't be like if the Tories get rid of another leader, which may well happen soon, who knows, you wouldn't be like, that's outrageous act of cancel culture. They can decide who represents them, you know.
I think I said in a piece, you wouldn't want your cancer doctor rooting for the tumours.
Yeah.
Right?
Because that is the thing, without wanting to get too misty, because I didn't go to Oxford, I've spoken to Oxford Uni once, but its reputation as being a place of freedom of speech, you know, and always having to weather these controversies because some far-right politician had been invited, or back in the day Malcolm X was invited to speak, or whatever. The fact that that institution could be led by someone who so doesn't believe in free speech that someone they debated within weeks of them being shot, they then celebrate that assassination. I mean, that says a lot about the kind of capture that you're talking about, James. But shall we turn to our final questions? Because it's pretty rare on this podcast that we have a guest who is so into the theories section that they've actually got a theory, because usually we've tried this and people haven't really got it. So let's start with the theories.
People usually have a theory if we probe them hard enough.
No, they exactly. It just takes a little bit longer than I would.
I've got a theory.
Like, okay, let's
Shall I
start
go
with you,
first,
Chris.
or-
Let's you can warm us up.
People
here,
who are obsessed with the EU and rejoining the EU. So I don't mean people who just voted Remain. I mean people who are still talking about it
And good,
9
honest
years
type,
later. They never leave the country. They never leave Britain, is my theory. And my evidence for this is, firstly, that they romanticize Europe to a ridiculous degree, and it doesn't really bear any resemblance to the actual Europe that I go to. And the other thing is, I travel, I guess, abroad more than average, right? Most people go, I think, once a year on average. I go a fair bit more than that. I'm not saying that my experience is necessarily representative, but I've been on planes to Europe many times since 2020. And I have never noticed any difference in the queues at the airports to what was before. Sometimes they're quite long, sometimes they're quite short. There's just no deterioration in my experience. Maybe I've been lucky, I don't know. But obviously you get on social media these people taking photos of queues, which are just normal passport queues, like they've always been, and saying, oh God, it's Brexit. Well, that just shows to me that you don't go abroad. You've never been in a passport queue because you stay in Britain, moaning about Britain and glorifying the European Union. Most of the time when you go to any airport, you just line up all passports. That's where you go, right? It's quite unusual actually for them to separate EU and everybody else. There's no reason for them to do it. The people who work behind there could quite easily deal with an American as with an Irishman. And even on the odd occasion where there is a specific line, it's usually like EU plus EEA plus UK plus Switzerland. These people don't know what life is like outside of these islands.
To the extent that some countries don't reciprocate, particularly on the e-gates and things, that's just a spiteful move on their part. They could easily do it if they wanted to.
And we didn't have e-gates before Brexit anyway, so that made no difference.
And it was one of those. Well, I was coming back from Germany recently. I saw one patriot arguing with. It was like, we allow you, you lot through our e-gates. Why are you not letting us?
Yeah, we are being the bigger man, aren't we?
Exactly. So maybe we should hold on to that. But
There's just a great consultant job out there to go and improve airports, right?
Yeah.
Like Singapore is the best airport in the world, along with Dubai, and Lee Kuan Yew had it's a great story about him getting the airport sorted, where he went through dozens of management consultants until he found one that said it would be a good idea to have a good airport, and just demolished the southeastern chunk of the island, made it the best in the world, made that the drive from the airport into town beautiful and stunning, so that investors would like it. And then you go to Stansted or Luton and you lose all faith in humanity. I once watched someone say, "Madam, can you put the baby carrier through the X-ray machine?" "No, madam, please take the baby out first." I almost became a lefty at that point. No, people can't be trusted.
They're almost designed to be as infuriating and soul destroying as possible.
Gatwick is very good these days, thanks to the e-gates. You just get off the plane, you go straight through. You can be on the train leaving Gatwick within about 10 minutes of the plane landing. It's awesome.
Absolutely. So what's your theory, James? What have you come with today?
My theory is, I mentioned earlier on that my wife's American, and she's very normal. She's called Alexandra, but the most American names sound like they could be hotels and hotel chains. Right? I think Chris and I stayed at the Merrick Garland in Prague once. That definitely wasn't Joe Biden's Attorney General. The Merrick Garland, the Grover Norquist, the Grover Cleveland,
Yes.
the Paris Hilton, obviously. I think you could do this with so many of them. The Gouverneur Morris was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Definitely stayed there.
The Sheridan Westlake.
The Sheridan Westlake. I've got so many points at the Sheridan Westlake, right? I think people should
He's
try
not
this at
American,
home.
You don't know who Sheridan is. He's not actually American, but it's a very hotel name.
But I think this is spot on. I'd love to hear more people suggest their versions of this.
So before we get out of here, we do have this final section, James, where we ask our guests, because we're a very libertarian anti-ban podcast, if you did have to have one ban, what would it be? If you were a dictator for the day, what would you crush? The only ground rule, basically, is that it can't be anything too worthy or serious, just something that kind of irks you.
You are a dictator.
I was going to go with the Muslim Brotherhood, but I think that's
That
too
qualifies.
serious.
Yeah.
I think this morning I tweeted, again, I'm like you, rare to wanting to ban things, but tweeted we should ban half pints, because Ed Davey did this ghastly little tweet of him holding a half pint. Most of it was head, going, "Oh, look, I've beaten Nigel Farage." Don't do that. Don't do that. And I saw someone that said you should just lean into being a kind of camp evil queen and have like a little creme de menthe and twizzle a little moustache or something. Like, be that.
Cigarette holder. or
Yeah,
something like
the whole half pint thing. Ban that. Like, if you have a cheeky pint, you don't have a cheeky half pint. Just do it properly.
that.
Why wasn't he going down a roller coaster or something like he normally does?
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, the theme parks
Why was
close up.
why was he
had to go to a pub?
Why wasn't he jumping 12 double-decker buses on them? E-scooter or whatever it is. Well, on that note, ban half pints and we'll see you in 2 weeks. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Last Orders. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and click the bell so you never miss another spiked video. If you're listening to this on your podcast app, make sure you subscribe there and give us a glowing 5-star review. And if you'd like to get in touch with your questions or ban suggestions, email us at lastorders@spiked-online.com.